Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Conatus News podcast. My name is Scott Davies, and joining me this evening will be Sara Iraqiya. There's a lot to get into this week, so let's begin. We'll start off with March for Our Lives and the ongoing debate around gun control in America. So, Sara, obviously being based in America, do you want to start by giving a summary of the movement, and then we'll start having with a bit of a discussion about that?
Right. Yes. So March for Our Lives was inspired by young people in America who are understandably sick of mass shootings. Something needs to be done. They want to get the attention of the government and of decision makers. I understand. I understand the pain. Not completely. I wasn't there. Everybody has their certain experience, but I understand where they're coming from. However, I do not think that when I look at some of the footage of what goes on in these protests, and I love this country for the fact that we have the right to protest so long as we get proper paperwork in and everything like that. We do have the right to protest. We are protected under that right, and but still, I saw some footage of some protesters, and I know when footage gets shared online, a lot of times it's the creme de la crazy, but some of the things I was seeing were downright insane and just deplorable. People who had no idea how guns guns work, no idea about the Second Amendment, have an idea about the Second Amendment, and want to have these really, really unhealthy kind of arguments that are just going to get nowhere. An approach to an argument that's going to get you nowhere. It's just going to make people angry. People are just going to get defensive, and it kind of looked like a recipe for disaster, like physical altercations or things like that may occur. And this, of course, is an issue. But what was the main issue for me was the fact of little children or anyone in secondary school being encouraged to skip school that day. I don't think that that's right. I thought that was quite insane to encourage young children to skip school and to laud them for skipping school. I mean, it's just it was quite shocking for me. If it's an issue that really bothers you, these kids these days they're on social media. They're playing with their phones. They're playing on all kinds of social media apps, and of course, social media is a great tool for activists. They can show their activism on there outside of school. They should be going to school, and for grown adults who have gotten their education, their secondary school education, encouraging young children to skip school, that's insane. When I was young, many things happened in this country that made kind of like a public uproar. None of us skipped school, and even when I was in secondary school, I was kind of still with that Muslim identity. And for Muslim holidays, I wouldn't really skip school. Sometimes I did because I could. They if I planned it in advance, that's a whole different story. If it's your holiday, plan it in advance, it's a whole different story. But even then, if it wasn't a holiday that was on my school calendar, I was usually in school that day. So yeah, to to laud children for walking out on their public school education paid for by the taxpayers, that's bizarre. That is just bizarre.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to watch the whole March for Our Lives movement and the broader debate around Second Amendment, guns, and all that. So what viewers might not know is I'm from Australia, so our gun laws are pretty much the polar opposite of America. Despite the fact that we're so similar in many ways, the gun issue is probably like the one thing where like Australia and America are really just diametrically opposed. So basically, we don't have, I guess, like a general sort of gun culture. It's very hard to get firearms over here. Mass shootings are not quite unheard of, but they're very, very rare. And so obviously, you know, on the one hand, you know, shootings in schools and that sort of thing is pretty much unfathomable for us because it's just not something that's happened here that we, you know, think about or consider. But I think the point that you raised about, you know, children becoming sort of de facto political activists and, you know, skipping school and that sort of thing, I actually agree with you. Like, you know, we have to make this. We have to sort of decide. Are, you know, children sort of you know, victims, and, you know, we have to protect them and that sort of thing. And that's a valid point. And then also, while yes, we do have to hear them, on the other hand, they can't be sort of untouchable. You can't have it both ways. You know, if you're going to sort of engage in these sort of adult debates around the Second Amendment, Constitution, you know, gun rights, and that sort of thing, you know, obviously you have to do it within reason and, you know, be respectful of that. But, you know, you have to be able to sort of debate the children as well if they're going to get involved in these debates. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that was sort of like where you're going with that as well, Sarah.
Yes, yes, of course. It it was kind of uncivil. It was, as I said, the creme de la crazy, and a bit unsettling to see that. To see that in the streets and happening in the most important cities in America with some of the most important decision makers here in the United States. To see that happening, I mean, yes, it is absolutely devastating. When I drive through DC and I see, when I'm driving through Washington, DC, and I see a bunch of ambulances, it's late at night, and a bunch of police officers and ambulances in certain parts of the district, I can assume what happened, and it's sad. But the reality is that the gun laws inside of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., are some of the strictest gun laws in the country. And this goes for another top dangerous city in America, as far as gun violence, which is weird to me because I love this city. I go there often. Is Chicago.
Yep.
So Chicago is number one, I believe, in gun violence in America. Their gun laws, oh my goodness, I took pictures because they have like stickers outside of many, like almost all of the establishments. They have stickers with a gun on it and like a red X over the gun, like no guns inside. And I'm here, you know, because right around Washington, D.C. is kind of the D.C. area. There's Southern Maryland and Northern Virginia. So as soon as you get into Virginia, you are in an open carry state. You can at any time see somebody walking in looking like it's the Wild West with their holsters out and their gun right there. So to see like a sign that says no gun, that's only outside of like I guess like the liquor stores or things like that here in Virginia, when you technically get into Virginia. But that's just the thing. There's kind of like, it's what are you going to do when you have these extremely strict gun laws in certain parts of the country and you're still seeing guns coming in? So perhaps your next argument will be, well, then we need to make it a federal thing to make guns less accessible. If they want to take it to the next step and make it a federal push for it to be a federal thing, that would be very difficult.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are seeing what's going on in England or in the UK. We're seeing what's going on in the UK as they are banning certain weapons and things like that. They are seeing an increase in other ways that violence gets carried out. So there's so many ways to hurt another person and to hurt them in the worst way, sometimes ways that are worse than death. And when you take guns away from the people, you are kind of opening the doors for these worse more abhorrent crimes to take place. And in my opinion, scarier. I mean, it's scarier to me to think that I could be walking down the street and thinking nothing looks suspicious. I'm walking down the street and I just see cars driving by, nothing suspicious at all. It's not like I see somebody walking and there's kind of a look in their eye or something, you know.
Yeah.
And a van just comes, you know, and it hits the people. That is so heartbreaking, terrifying. For some people, they didn't even know what was coming in their last moments of their life. They didn't even see it coming. That is terrible. And that is the next step. If you ban guns, there's going to be another weapon, popularized weapon that people will use. You ban that, then what are you going to, you're going to ban everything? If people want to commit atrocities, they're going to do that.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point that like first of all, the idea that some American liberals have of basically confiscating every gun, and what gets me the most is that they'll often cite Australia's precedent of like a gun buyback after. So what happened here in 1996? There was basically a mass shooting called the Port Arthur massacre. I think like 35 people were killed, and basically what happened was you know, the majority of the nation's guns were bought back at the time, and which was I think about 500,000 in total. And a lot of them, and some American liberals have this idea that you can just sort of do that in America, despite the fact that there's more than 300 million guns. We've got the Second Amendment, you know, centuries of this, you know, culture which, you know, places primacy on, you know, guns going back to the American Revolution. So there's this real sort of cultural value to, you know, owning guns for recreation, for self-defense, all that sort of thing. And there's this idea that they can somehow impose the Australian view on guns and just to like transplant it to America, which I think is seriously misguided. And this is coming from someone who, you know, supports sort of you know, strict gun legislation and all that. Like you have to sort of work within the culture that you're in. So America is sort of like inherently a nation of like high rates of gun ownership. So you kind of have to draw parallels to other nations which have, you know, high rates of gun ownership, but, you know, less gun violence. Maybe look to those countries and see, okay, what are they doing, you know, culturally, sort of in terms of legislation. You know, mental health, I think, is a big one as well, which sort of doesn't get brought up enough. So I think while, you know, obviously the idea of, you know, reducing gun violence is laudable, we all support that, but the way that I think a lot of people associated with March for Our Lives is doing it is kind of misguided. And I also want to raise another point that you raised earlier, going back to the whole, you know, children leaving school thing. I'm a pre-service teacher. You know, I'm about to get my license to become a teacher. This idea that, you know, children becoming political activists, and, you know, that kind of implicates me as a teacher. Like I have to sort of get involved with these political issues. You know, I kind of have to go, okay, I want to teach kids, but, you know, there's this idea that I have to sort of stop being a teacher and let the kids go out of school or this sort of thing. And it kind of forced me to kind of, you know, get involved. I just want to be a teacher at the end of the day. So even if I agree with the issue, you know, it kind of puts me and sort of other teachers in that awkward spot of having to become political activists when that's not what we're meant to be. We're meant to be, you know, impartial sort of teachers of, you know, English or history, whatever subject we happen to be, you know, experts in, and, you know, teaching the children that are at school. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of like related kind of cultural issues which aren't really sort of being brought up, which I think need to be like paid attention to as well.
That is a very good point that you're making there, from the perspective of the teachers. I do wonder what's going through the mind of teachers. I really wonder. I would love to know. I do have friends who are teachers. I'm not sure if they are still teaching or if they're retired. I was a very bad kid. When I was growing up, I was a very bad kid. And I still somehow maintain friendships with I think that's why I maintained friendships with some of my teachers. I think a couple of them were entertained. Hi. Thanks for teaching me things like French and other things. See, I'm not friends with any of my math teachers. That I would want to walk out on that. If I were a kid and I didn't really have a full understanding of what's going on, let's say I'm in a neighborhood where there is virtually no gun violence.
Yep.
And I hear that that kids are skipping school because they're angry about the school shootings. That I'm a little kid and I just hear about it on the news. It's not really super affecting me. I'm gonna leave school. I'm gonna leave school with all my friends. I'm gonna do what all my friends are doing. It wouldn't be when kids are so young, at such a young age, to say that they are activists. It's I'm sure some of them are, because, for example, I was speaking about this with a friend who grew up in Iraq. When you grow up in a war zone, you tend to grow up faster. You tend to mature faster, kind of intellectually. You have to develop an understanding of complex and difficult topics very quickly.
Yeah.
It's a means of survival. So for some children who live in neighborhoods where gun violence is common, or if their neighborhood isn't kind of a hub for gun violence, but there was a school shooting, I think it's a different kind of story. It's a different story there. When I was younger, I remember that there were a lot of students who committed suicide, especially in high school. No one's really talking about that. I remember sometimes there would be like a statement that the principal would make, and we would take a moment of silence. But we would take a moment of silence every day, every morning, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yep.
We also take a moment of silence. So if somebody wants to pray or do whatever, for me, kind of like sitting there, or trying to get the last of my homework done. That was my moment of silence. But yeah, it was. I don't think that it did them justice, and I saw it happen a lot, and I saw it also happen in affluent neighborhoods where suicide is common. And you would think, why would this kid kill themselves? Why? Why? They have everything. Their life seems awesome. They got accepted into an amazing school, this and that. So we need to perhaps stop stigmatizing mental health.
Yeah, I think that's a big one.
I think that's a big one because a lot of people are not seeking help for their mental health. So, for example, I was actually speaking about this with some libertarian feminists. We were having a discussion, and it is called a Ladies of Liberty Alliance. So we were having a little discussion how the government may oppress women. In what ways? And I said, well, in cases of domestic violence or stalker situations, things like that, a woman is given a piece of paper, basically, and it's very hard. In some states, it's so difficult, and I know this firsthand. In some places, it is very difficult to get the restraining order in the first place. And then the restraining order is essentially a piece of paper where you have to wait. You have to wait for something bad to happen to you before anybody gets prosecuted, before anything happens, before the police get involved. Essentially, they're telling you to wait for something bad to happen to you. And
that's not even really a restraining order then.
Right. I mean, right. And then that person will be arrested. it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of a joke. It's kind of a way that is it fails women. Kind of a way that the system,
Yeah.
I felt, fails women and can also fail men. But we were in this context, we were talking about in the context of women, but can
Yeah.
also fail men. Women can stalk men, or men can stalk men. Men get stalked, is my point.
Yeah.
And these things happen to everybody. When it comes to a gun, owning a gun. So let's say that this woman, and this is a very common case that happens. So let's say this woman has a stalker case. She goes to the police. She gets a restraining order. She has to wait until her stalker does something to her before she can call the police. And she is encouraged to go get therapy, but she doesn't want to. Because what is the definition of crazy, or of not mentally fit to own a gun? What does that mean? And
Yeah.
that means different things for different states. I'm not familiar with all 50 states and the details of their gun laws. I have not even been to all 50 states, or even nearly to all 50 states. I hope so. I hope I can one day. I hope I can say I've visited all 50 states. But yeah, I don't know all of the gun laws in detail. But for example, say a woman goes in and gets a therapy, just going in to get therapy, a therapy session.
Yeah.
That could be a question or something that shows up in a background check. It almost becomes in the hand of her doctor. People say things sometimes. Sometimes people say things when they're impassioned.
Yeah.
And you know, as far as ethics goes, for therapists, they have to report these things, and then it's not really as confidential as you'd want it to be, or as you would expect it to be. So that's kind of a way that I think there is a failure there, because the first thing that someone, I'm going to stop saying woman, I'm going to be Trudeau, and I'm going to say a person. People can't. Oh dear. Oh, Justin. Okay.
It's good that you're being inclusive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, because I've heard stories from so many people, from men included, about crazy people out there. There are crazy nutcases out there. And for them, kind of the first step that one would want to do is get some means of their own protection. If the police are not coming to protect you, you want to get your own means of protection. You want to get a gun.
Yeah, of course. Like, you want to have some way to sort of,
Right.
protect yourself.
You went to therapy because you were traumatized by being stalked. So then you have a bunch of crazy people who don't go to therapy. Just terrifying. I think a lot of people, even if you're not, I'm not going to say crazy. I will say if you're feeling mentally unwell, if you're mentally ill, if you just need somebody to talk to, there's really nothing wrong with going to a therapist. But it's kind of in their hands. Your safety becomes in their hands. And all of these things don't cross someone's head when they're thinking, oh, I need to talk to someone about this thing that, these a string of events that happened. I want to talk it out with someone. They end up not, but some of them end up not in that sort of situation. But it's not something that crosses like their mind immediately.
Right.
It's not it's not something that crosses someone's mind until it happens to them or someone they love. So I think that is therein lies the failure. Because when we describe these mass shootings, we see a few of them were uh, um, uh, terrorist attacks, politically motivated.
Yep.
And then some were mentally ill, mentally unstable. That.
Or like the lone wolf type thing.
The lone wolf, yeah. So I think that there needs to be some kind of focus on mental illness, and to take it and getting therapy, and the amount of government interference in our personal lives as Americans. I think that it's absolutely preposterous that if you go into therapy just because you need to talk to someone about something, that you lose your Second Amendment right. You can potentially lose it.
Yeah, I think
and the government is in your medical files. That's insane. That is, that's insane. But that's me. That I'm a libertarian.
right.
I'm a bit of a libertarian. So,
Oh, really? I had no idea.
freedom.
No, I think there's some very
Yeah.
interesting points that you bring up, because I think obviously over here in Australia, we've obviously taken pretty much the opposite like perspective. So where we've sort of got a lot of government regulations in terms of firearm access, especially in terms of when it comes to like people who have mental health issues and that sort of thing. And like it has worked for Australia insofar that we've got very few sort of gun deaths. But like I stressed before, it's just a completely different culture. What
Right.
works for Australia is just is probably not going to work for America, and in trying to do so, could end up making the problem worse. So I think you raised some good points. Is that perhaps instead of thinking immediately, oh, this must be because of a lack of regulation. Maybe it's the regulations themselves that are the issue, that are sort of perpetuating this problem, and perhaps trying a more libertarian tack on issues of gun violence, because like you pointed out before, the states that have the strictest gun laws, are often also coincidentally the ones that have the highest rates of violence, whereas places like I think Texas, for example, gun ownership is through the roof there, but
Someone
gun
pulls out
violence
a gun
is
in Texas with the intent to shoot. They would be down quicker than they could pull out their gun. They would be down before they could pull the trigger. It would be over. So yeah. I'm sorry to cut in, but yeah, that's what it is.
yeah, it does. But like I was saying, perhaps sort of this instinct of regulation is immediately answered. Like perhaps you need to consider cultural sort of issues, mental health, and not necessarily just go, oh, there must be this one regulation, and if we get that through Congress, oh, the problem is solved. Like it's a lot more complex than that. And I think probably one of the errors that martial art is making is that it's making it like a strict sort of regulatory or legislative issue. Like, oh, we just need the right law and it'll all figure itself out. Like it's a lot more complicated than that. And this is coming from someone that's sympathetic to the cause of strict gun laws and that sort of thing. Like you have to take a more sort of nuanced perspective on the whole thing.
Oh yes. Oh, definitely. And also, I do want to add, you see a lot less mass gun shootings when it comes to counter-violence extremism or Islamist extremism, Islamist attacks using guns. Rarely happens. Yes, there was the Orlando nightclub shooting, but it rarely happens as much. There may be a few reasons for that. I will name one big reason is because here in the United States, and I go on Capitol Hill a lot, and I sit in at Congress. I sit in on congressional hearings and when I'm able to, and I listen. And there are quite a few initiatives going on for counter-violent extremism. Many think tanks every day discussing these things. But it's not terrorists with the Islamist agenda that you're seeing doing the school shootings. It's everyone's saying mental illness, and then people want to say, the articles I will see is, how come when a white person does it, it's mental illness? That is not what we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about, how come we don't want to talk about mental illness? How come we don't want to counter mental illness in America?
Yeah, that is a very good point as well. Like, because I think also because obviously that's a lot more of a complex debate, and you know, it's going to reveal some sort of uncomfortable things that maybe people want to kind of gloss over. You know, and
Right. And there's
people.
some things that can't, that of course, people live with mental illness every day. There are many people in there, they're high functioning and things like that. But at least thinking about management, I'm just thinking I should reword, management of symptoms, focusing on these sort of things, somebody to talk to, of course, and just kind of paying more attention in a way that is just as caring as we care about Islamist attacks on the United States. And we're getting angry about very trivial things, such as titles of articles being about somebody's skin tone and, you know, the phrase mental illness. I think that we should be sad that we allow people to get to that point in this country, where their mental illness has been so not managed,
Yeah.
swept under the rug, or it's been stigmatized so severely that they have to go to extreme measures, or they feel that they have to go to extreme measures in their head. Like I said, one of the things I remember in high school were many students had committed suicide, both in my high school and other high schools. I remember. It was terrible. It hurts everybody involved.
Yep.
So these are definitely some things that we have to consider and take into account in this country. I think that's how we should do it, because, as you say, I really appreciate that your words, Scott, what you're saying about this being our culture. It is. It's quite embedded in our culture. To take guns away from the people, I mean,
Yeah, it's
good luck.
this is it's something that I have to sort of point out to a lot of people over here in Australia a lot, because they like when I sort of point out these sort of nuances and, you know, the sort of cultural value of guns and all that sort of thing, you know, try and raise like a bit of a historical perspective on it. A lot of people conflate that with me being sort of pro-gun, or, you know, sort of trivializing gun deaths. Like, I'm absolutely not. Like, I'm, you know, just as concerned as anyone else. Like, it's, you know, tragic, and like I've said several times, you know, we all want to do our utmost to reduce gun violence as much as possible. All I'm saying is, like, you have to sort of deal with America, like sort of the case of, you know, American gun violence and gun ownership and that sort of thing, as, you know, within its relevant cultural context. You can't sort of, like, as I've been saying, try and sort of implant, you know, Australia's gun culture and laws, or, you know, Britain's gun culture and laws, do what's sort of happened over there, and try and transplant that into America and assume you're going to get the same results, because you're not. There's so many different factors, sort of, you know, demographics, population, you know, just the amount of guns that are there, everything else. And so all I'm saying is that you have to sort of deal, you know, with America, with that case, you know, as it is. You can't sort of try and pretend or wish that it's, you know, like something else. And until sort of, I think, a lot of liberals and progressives sort of come to terms with that, I feel like you know, they're not going to really win the gun debate very much, apart from maybe on, you know, social media, really sort of like activist circles. Like, you're not going to get sort of like the general population on board until, you know, you start to understand sort of the gun culture a bit more, sort of, you know, demonstrate that you actually, you know, have maybe some experience with guns, or, you know how it works, that sort of thing. And you're not just sort of going, oh, you're a gun owner, you know, you must be some crazy conservative, like, oh, you must, you know, hate, you must, you know, not value lives or whatever, all that sort of thing. Like, until liberals and progressives stop with that sort of mentality, like, And this is someone who's like fairly sort of socially liberal myself. Like, you're not going to, you know, make any sort of substantial change. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Oh yeah, fighting, yelling, and screaming at each other in the streets is not going to do anything. It's not yelling at each other, trying to make each other look stupid, and putting videos online. Look how stupid this liberal is. Look how stupid this conservative is. You know, and the both sides will be going at it. It's not doing anything. That's terrible. Actually, I would say that's terrible. That's
Yeah.
quite disgusting behavior. It's not doing anything for the problem at hand, which we both agree there is a problem, and there are solutions. I'm actually optimistic about possible solutions. I think that it will soon be addressed because at this point, yes, it's happened so often. It's happened quite often. And just like we took Islamic terror seriously in this country, we will start taking gun violence seriously in this country.
Yeah, and gun violence and sort of
yes.
related issues like, you know, mental health and sort of some of the other factors as well. Like, I have been noticing, I guess, sort of like as an outside observer, like, I feel like the debate after this most recent incident has sort of opened up more. So people are starting to become more willing to think more holistically about the issue. So, you know, thinking about mental health, thinking about, you know, incorporate, like, thinking about legislation, but so also understanding, you know, the relevant sort of culture and context that America operates under.
Oh yeah.
And it's starting to, I think, slowly starting to develop more nuanced views on each side. But there has been obviously also a lot of sort of, you know, mudslinging back and forth. You know, like the I think like the CNN town halls and that sort of thing. Those debates that that's kind of strange to watch. Like, as an Australian, just sort of like the whole way that went. Like, it almost felt like, you know, there's more about point scoring than the actual issue.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've spoken about this with some friends of mine who are interested or work in policy here in I'm here in DC right now. So I have spoken with many people who work in policy and are interested in policy, public policy and whatnot. And they kind of agree. A lot of times these things are like shows. So they might come off to people as this, are they putting on a show? What's going on here? And I mean, even a lot of Americans feel the same way on the whole political spectrum, are feeling the same way about this. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed in a way that is really from the heart. After 9/11, United States came together in a way that was just unseen. People just came together in a way that was unseen. And I wrote about it a while back, almost a year since my first article was Conatus News. In the token ex-Muslim, I talk about my apostasy and leaving Islam. Yes, there was some racism, but I do remember. I recall on that day in 9/11, we lived close to the metro, and so we would have a lot of people coming by, a lot of different types of folks from all over the world, and this German lady is frantically knocking on our door, speaking a little bit German and English, and my father lets her in, lets her use the phone, lets her call her family, because he said we all have to stick together right now.
Yep.
There's something really bad going on. And I was very young, so it was very hard to explain it to me. I was not sure what the word terrorist even meant. I was like, someone who inflicts terror. You know, I was just thinking about the etymology of it.
Yeah.
So there was that, but Americans really came together after 9/11, and when they came together, there were some who came together to be a bunch of racists or bigots. That happened. I'm not going to say that didn't happen. I was at the receiving end of some of it. So I'm not going to say that that didn't happen, that people did not become bigots or anything like that. But there were the smart ones, the intelligent, the real soul of America, which got together and created a kind of movement to make sure that something of that caliber, that they can do everything in their power to stop something of that caliber happening again in the United States.
Yeah.
And stating all these counter-violent extremism programs, including people who have experience with Islam, like knowledge of Islam and knowledge of, more importantly, Islamism. Islamism is kind of a like a political Islam politicized. I'm probably going to get yelled at for that definition, but whatever. YOLO. But yeah, so there were people who were included from the Muslim community. Many Muslims started questioning Islam, leaving Islam. Some of them began reform movements and things like this, and many of them call themselves peace-loving Muslims. And they help America, they help the United States with intelligence, with counter-violent extremism, and this is absolutely special. So I would like to see America come together in that way. I don't want to see America come together in a way that is encouraging children to skip school. That's just ridiculous. That's a shame. That is shameful.
Yeah,
that is absolutely shameful.
Yeah,
and of course, the universities are gonna. I've been seeing the universities sending out the letters or putting up the letters online. We will not. We will not. You know.
I count this against you.
Not accept you or use that against you if you protested. Of course, they're gonna say that. They're universities.
Probably get you extra credit at half of them.
They want money. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I'm university educated. I paid for my education. I quite enjoyed it. But it's the reality. University wants money. And if all the kids are going out and protesting, of course the universities are going to say, we support you wholeheartedly. So that wasn't heartwarming for me one bit. I kind of saw right through that. I'm kind of annoyed by that. And I think that we can do better. I honestly, I think we can do better. And we need to think about mental illness the way that we think about Islamist attacks in America and other issues that America that the United States has faced throughout the years that were dealt with and don't really happen that much anymore. So yeah, so I think we covered that
very comprehensively.
Yes, that was very thorough.
Yes.
You wrote a fantastic article. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. So early this week, I wrote another article for Conatus News. It's entitled China's One Belt, One Road Initiative, if you're interested in having a read of that. And basically, it's about this massive economic program, initiative, stimulus, whatever you want to call it, that China is undertaking in many countries, primarily in Eurasia, but also in parts of Africa and even Latin America. So basically, what they're doing is they're offering loans to many different countries, often developing or struggling sort of economies, and giving them loans to participate in basically major infrastructure projects that those countries basically need, to get their economies moving closer to the 21st century. And basically, I sort of outlined not only sort of the economic reason for doing this, which was, to help China sort of further announce itself in the world stage as like a major economic player. Not that it already isn't, but just to sort of enhance that reputation, and also to develop more favorable trading terms. So it's not sort of led so much by the US. China has more of an influence, currying favor with many different countries as well. And so there's obviously like a geopolitical and security aspect of it, because a lot of what China is doing is helping to build like a lot of seaports and open up sea routes. So Chinese warships and obviously trade can go through the major corridors of the world, like the major maritime corridors of the world. This sort of goes in hand with other initiatives that they're doing, like for example, South China Sea, the military development and building of artificial islands, shoring up their sphere of influence. And so basically, my piece sort of looks at that in detail, tries to make sort of like a balanced assessment of the implications of that for the global sort of economic system, geopolitics, national security for nations that are affected, and sort of poses the question of are sort of Western nations like the United States, Australia, New Zealand, India, England, so on, are they sort of what are they doing to like counter this? Are they alive to the challenges that will pose? Yeah, so Sarah, I don't know if I think you read it. So what were your thoughts? Anything you might want to add?
When you say what were Western countries doing to counter this, what did you mean by that exactly? I mean, in terms of like economic development, or not economic power.
Yes, so I think for a lot of developed Western nations, it's a lot more about sort of geopolitics and sort of strategy. So, for example, Australia has sort of been offered by China to be a part of this program, but Australia's like National Security Agency sort of knocked it back on the ground. Said, okay, well, the economic benefit is minimal, but they are uncomfortable with, I guess, Chinese institutions having like more of a presence within Australia, like Chinese like state businesses and that sort of thing. I think New Zealand has taken a similar track under their new government recently. They've indicated they're going to pull out of Belt Road Initiative sort of projects. Obviously, the United States is obviously thinking about how they can sort of counter this and the possibility of trading partners sort of choosing China over them in their sort of like, I guess, tussle, not necessarily outright trade war, although a lot of people seem to think that China and America are already in a trade war, which they're not really, as much as Trump says that they are. It's not really happening because it's not beneficial for either nation at the end of the day, as much as the posturing of oh, we're going to tariffs and all that sort of thing. Like it's it sounds good as tough rhetoric, but to actually do that, a lot more harmful than beneficial for either side.
Right, and I can see how. I mean, from what I got from your article, which I found super fascinating, and I really suggest everyone go read it. Find Scott Davies. He's smart. Read his stuff.
Thank you.
Ding. Nailed it. Okay. Yes. So I thought it was super. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was it was really insightful about something that maybe not a lot of people are aware of. Um, so I think what might freak some people out is that your article does um, shed light on the fact that this is influencing, this is kind of increasing. So China is giving these loans to these developing economies, whereas China is part of BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So they're considered kind of intermediate economies.
Yep.
So as far as the social sciences go, but anyway, that's what they're considered. They're considered intermediate, and they are kind of so they're giving these essentially loans to developing countries.
Yep.
And should they not be able to pay them off, then China owns these enterprises now. And what that is kind of leading to, what it could possibly lead to, is the fear of China's influence in the world. Should we fear China's influence in the world? I think we're already pretty influenced by. I mean, I think it's already kind of.
I mean, it depends on like, sort of what country or like what part of the world you're based in, and there's sort of circumstances. So you mentioned how if countries were unable to pay off their loans, that they would foreclose on on the deal that they made, and China would basically own whatever sort of infrastructure that they helped to build for 99 years. So that's already happened in Sri Lanka. I believe there was a port, like a seaport there. I'll just have a look at the article.
Mm-hmm.
The Hambantota port. So basically, the rights to the port were ceded to a Chinese company who now have control of the port for 99 years. So that's an example of what can happen, and obviously, that's obviously quite a risk for nations that choose to take out that loan. So, like, obviously, the economic benefit, is obviously very good for these countries, and the more developed that countries in the world are in general, then I think overall that's probably a good thing. But there are some of the ways that China's going about this. Some of the loan terms, and then there's also the fact that they're kind of doing it unilaterally, so it's outside of global institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and that sort of thing. So they're kind of there's less accountability in that sense, and then also the fact that the Chinese government in general is like extremely opaque. So there's not like a whole lot of transparency and accountability, like if something goes wrong, because obviously like the Chinese Communist Party, they're not beholden to anyone. So, and sort of like the bureaucracy and all that as well. So there's those sort of issues to consider, because obviously like the way the Chinese want to develop their economy and like how they do business is very different from how, say, America does business. And so when I sort of raise, there's going to be potential problems or complications. That's sort of what I'm getting at. It's this sort of clash of like economic ideologies and sort of how different countries do business. Like it's a different way of thinking. So obviously for us Westerners, like we have to be mindful of that.
Right. It is. It's quite the shift, isn't it? A lot of people, when they are studying economics or global economics, they don't consider the differences in culture. There's a cultural aspect to economics. To look at it as a comparative is, you have to look at it with an open mind, and you have to keep these things in mind and not jump to conclusions, which I can already hear people jumping to conclusions. I can already hear conspiracy theories and people in general just jumping to conclusions, and China's taking over the world and all this, and I mean, come on. Um, come on, get it together. We're okay, you know. But I love the fact that you brought up that the way economics are done, culture does matter, and to link the two is that's excellent. I mean, that is what people need to kind of understand that before. I think that a lot of Americans, well, the world is getting smaller with the internet and everything, and
Yep.
and globalization. But with Americans historically, we're the isolated ones. We have our buddy Justin, Justin across the border, and the Mexicans that we pissed off. So we're just here. And sometimes for people who global affairs or international relations is not something they think about all the time. They're blue collar workers, skilled work. Often you're working so many hours, and you just you get home, you have something to eat, something to drink. Say hi to your family, say I love you to your family, and all this stuff, and go to bed and wake up and do it again. And so these kind of concepts don't cross their mind. But if they hear the idea like China is taking over, China is taking control over certain enterprises or corporations, or whatever they gave the loan for. They will. I even said like the words "taking over." Like they. I can see people thinking like, "Oh my goodness, they're taking over," and we're America, And while I totally agree that America is awesome, and I love living here in the United States, I love life here in the United States, and it's great. But honestly, there are the cultural differences, but certain cultures need to understand that since the world is getting smaller, globalization is a thing. They need to start. I think culture on a global scale needs to and will begin to change. There's no survival otherwise. There's no economic survival otherwise.
Yep.
So there kind of needs to be a bit of a standard, a bit of an understanding, a basic understanding. And I think that is kind of just coming underway. And when that comes completely underway, I don't think that this will be too much of an issue. But I think right now, I mean, this is excellent. This is excellent for people to know.
Yeah, like
not a lot of people know about this.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that it's all happening so rapidly. So the whole project is, I think, it started in 2013. It's projected to last for about another decade or so, and by the end of it, there'll be multiple trillions of dollars worth of investment in so many different countries around the world. Like there's just the scale of it. Like it's inevitably going to have quite substantial sort of effects, and you have to be aware of it. It's not to say that every sort of Chinese infrastructure project in other countries, they're going to immediately take over their culture and politics and institutions. But at the same time, you have to be aware of the differences in how the Chinese do business to how Westerners do. How there have been a few cases which sort of raise a bit of a red flag. You have to consider like possibly some dodgy things might happen, or some bad things might happen. But at the same time, you have to take like a rational sort of view of it. Like there are obviously going to be quite big, substantial economic benefits as well, and we're in a more globalized economy overall. Like it's sort of like each country has to take it on like a case by case basis. Like they have to sort of understand their sort of geopolitical situation, economic situation, and decide like, do we want these loans, on what terms, like how much, and that sort of thing. Like it's not just sort of like reflectively going, yes, this is good, or no, this is going to be terrible. It's yeah. So like that was sort of like what I was trying to get at. Like you have to, there's many different factors behind why the Chinese are doing this, and like what a few different case samples of like, where it's worked well, where countries have sort of rejected it outright, where countries have taken the loans but haven't been able to pay it back, and then the consequences of that. Like I tried to put out like a few different scenarios of like what the initiative has sort of meant, and tried to give like a bit of like a few different views on that.
Right. I think that this article was excellent. It opened my eyes to something I didn't really know much about at all. I mean, I wasn't surprised to read it. I haven't been really lately. I've been taking a little bit of a break from the news, things like
Yes,
that.
fair enough.
And I intermittently take breaks from the news. So and then this is kind of I mean, this is very particular. I'm not sure how many. I mean, how I'm looking at this article again. So okay. So I'm not sure how. Do a lot of people know about this, or is this kind of a common? Have people been talking about this in the news?
It's obviously well known within sort of like international relations and global politics sort of fields.
Right.
I think one of the big problems is from what I've read of it, they've either been like very sort of academic and technical sort of articles that aren't accessible to like anything resembling like a general audience, or the ones that have been a bit more sort of like readable for the general reader. They've been very sort of partisan and kind of clickbaity, only like looking at one aspect of the issue, or sort of presenting it in like a binary sort of, oh, this is inherently bad, or oh, this is amazing, we need to sort of get on board with this right now sort of thing. Like I just what I've read of it, and this is also something I saw like a few people on Twitter say, like they're always going on about how like, oh, I want to know more about this, but it's hard to get like a kind of a balance, or sort of like a more exploratory sort of article, as opposed to just sort of like an op-ed, crude sort of opinion piece. And so what I tried to do is write more of like the explainer. That I think like quite a few people have been seeking out, and the sort of responses and reception I've been getting for it seems like I've kind of struck a chord with people who were kind of looking for something like that, and then my article popped up, and it sort of served like that need to add that sort of perspective to the conversation.
Yeah, that's excellent to bring this to light, and even me being the nerd I am with no friends, being the nerd that I am, I did not know about this, and to find this article and to read this article was my pleasure, and everybody needs to go read it and read more from Scott because he's awesome. So yeah, I am really glad we covered these topics. Next time with Dan, definitely we'll kind of cover the anti-Semitism issue.
Yep.
So that's definitely something. And with the recent woman who was murdered in her home in Paris, heartbreaking story. That's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. It's absolutely monstrous. It's something that we need to be cognizant of, that this is a pressing issue in our society, and something that needs to be looked at in a way that is constructive and going to make positive change, as opposed to in a way of pointing fingers. Someone is being anti-Semitic or this or that, or if they're not, or if they are, and using them as kind of just like you said, score points with one another, against one another. It's this is not the subject to do that with, at least not in my opinion. And I don't see why that would be in anyone's opinion. That's kind of sick. And yeah, I think that that's definitely something to be discussed, and why discussions surrounding anti-Semitism are discussed the way that they are. So
yes, so I think we'll
good
leave
to
it
go.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Just before we go, so obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel at Conatus News, conatusnews.com for obviously all our latest articles, including the one that was talked about today, which is entitled China's One Belt, One Road Initiative. We're also on Twitter at Conatus News. My handle is at ScottJDavies01, and Sarah, your Twitter handle is?
It's AL_Iraqiya, IRAQIYA.
Yep, and I believe you also have a Facebook page.
I do. Search Sara Iraqiya, and you will certainly Sara no H. You'll find with the spelling in Conatus News under authors. You can find a link to my Facebook and my Twitter under my author profile. But you can also just look me up, and most likely I still have a picture up with me with a good old American flag in the background and a drink that came that was surprisingly like the size of a huntsman spider, which was which was great. I'm glad that happened when it arrived. I was glad to see that. So I was just, you'll see that picture of me being extra.
All right, so that's all our social media plugs, and also we're on Patreon at Conatus News. If you like Conatus News podcast or all our written content, everything else, and if you wish to consider giving us a donation, we would appreciate that greatly. So from myself and Sarah, thank you for watching this podcast. Goodbye, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
See you next time.